Through the application of Michael Foucault's post-structuralist framework of knowledge and power system relationships, we will be identifying the reproduction and participation of Western knowledge systems in First Nation communities. Specifically looking at educational programs targeted towards Aboriginal students, we argue that Western education is imposed upon First Nation communities as a way of ensuring their assimilation. We will begin by explaining the mechanisms of knowledge and power system relationships. It is important to note that there are different types of knowledge systems, some of which are more accepted than others in our Western society. If a knowledge system is reproduced and participated in, it holds power over groups of people through the internalization of that system. Reproduction of this knowledge would require people to participate within the system of knowledge which functions as a dynamic network. The knowledge system is successful if it is being used to dispute disagreeing points of view because they are using the knowledge system itself to dispute it. Finally, the dynamic nature of the knowledge system means that it is more readily accepted, and therefore it is internalized, reproduced, and more powerful. Thus, the accepted knowledge system can be used to create power regimes. We therefore suggest that through the utilization of this system, First Nation students are being forced to participate in a Western education, devaluing their knowledge, resulting in the loss of their own knowledge system. A Western knowledge system consists of three main pillars of education. This education should be of Christian doctrine and it should focus on literacy and numeracy. In contrast, First Nation knowledge systems focus on family and group socialization, skill development, oral teachings, cultural rituals participation, and community ceremonies. Due to the processes of colonialization, the standard of living for First Nation communities has declined. With a growing agricultural-centered economy and legal documents such as the Indian Act, we can see the decline of First Nation peoples into poverty. However, their poverty was caused by unsupported Western ideals. This created a belief that the only way to improve their living standards was through Westernized education and assimilation into Western society. It is this set of ideals that led to the creation of residential schools. In these schools, many were violently coerced to convert to Christianity. As a result, many First Nation children were now being taught Western forms of knowledge. Future generations of First Nations children were more accepting of Western knowledge systems, losing touch with their own cultures. It is through these processes that First Nation students would internalize Westernized values rather than the First Nation ways of living. As many of these residential schools were located far away from their isolated reserves, many students would be also leaving their cultural educators behind. For example, some First Nations communities had specific roles called fire keepers, who were responsible for teaching historical and religious traditions. A knowledge system can be successful even with disagreeing points of views. In this case, due to the horrendous treatment of First Nation students in residential schools, First Nations became untrusting of Western forms of education. It is exactly this distrust that strengthens the Western knowledge system. If they refuse to conform to Western knowledge systems, they will not be able to succeed in Western society due to the barriers produced by that system. Barriers, in this sense, consist of the lack of interest in First Nation knowledge and cultures, as well as the lack of funding from our government. Ultimately, these barriers force them to adhere and assimilate into our system. The government does, however, offer a solution to this lack of funding. They will happily provide more funding for reserve schools if they become a part of their programs such as the First Nations Student Success Program. These programs offer funding as long as the First Nations educators conform to teaching Western types of knowledges. In particular, the curriculum must focus on literacy, numeracy, and school retention. These programs do not teach First Nation forms of education, languages, or cultures. First Nations students are forced to participate in a Western knowledge system to succeed, but the system itself contains barriers that does not allow complete success, ultimately forcing them to adhere to that knowledge system's values and ways. As a result, First Nations cultures and languages are lost through the processes of colonialization and assimilation.